the driver is actually kin with these guys with guns some way or another. They manage to put together the lineages and the kinship relations and determine that the driver is in fact one of them. And so, fine, keep going. Anyway, he notes the extraordinary provincialism that the Belgians had actually intentionally maintained in the interior of the Congo, keeping Congolese people from knowing much of anything about what was going on anywhere else. They didn't develop roads and infrastructure to facilitate movement. They, in many ways, prevented the formation of any kind of consciousness of the nation itself as a whole. Pan-Africanism, he talks a little bit about the rise of these leaders, these African indigenous leaders who tapped into this ferment of nationalism and independence and began to articulate a Pan-African ideology in which all the peoples of Africa were in fact somehow united, or should unite, and recognize that their common struggle was with the Europeans, not with each other. And he also talks about the bar. The bar being a place, he's got a marvelous description of the importance of bars in cities for the discussion of these political ideas, the drinking of beer, and the listening to music that helped bring people together across boundaries of ethnicity and language and that kind of thing. He suggests that the bar really is the central public space of these cities for Africans, where they could see and contact with each other and start to think about the idea of being a nation at all. Here's a map of the ethnic areas of sub-Saharan Africa to give you a sense of how little they align with the territorial boundaries of nation states, right? The difficulties of finding some kind of unity across these long-standing linguistic and ethnic lines, frequently with long histories of rivalry and, in some cases, outright violence between them. And again, these legacies continue to play out to this day in a lot of parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Kapuscinski's goal was to find out about this guy, Patrice Lumumba, who had been elected the first leader of an independent Congo. And as you can see, he's not dressed like a native, is he? He stands out. He's educated through the Belgian sort of colonial apparatus. He speaks French. He's extremely articulate and eloquent. And he's an extremely charismatic leader who articulates this philosophy, this vision of an independent Congo in which everyone would come together in a nationalist sort of enthusiasm and cease bickering with each other and sort of rise to the challenge of independence. And he's dressed in these starched white shirts, and he's very, very different from the people he is speaking to in much of Congo. But he manages to win the prime ministership. He was very shortly after that abducted by Belgian colonial or Belgian military officials at the behest of or with the tacit consent of the U.S. government, and he was killed. And in his place was this man came to power, Mobutu Sese Seko, who, as you can see, is sort of copying the look of indigenous dress, and he would be the dictator of what he called Zaire for the next 40 years, give or take. Anyway, this is a picture of Lumumba being taken away when he was arrested. This is Dr. Nico. He was the guitarist in that song that you just heard. What do you notice about this? The Plymouth Fury? Nice car, huh? The music from this period captures this incredible enthusiasm and optimism about what independence might mean. Jazz, the reason they're all called orchestras because they were frequently organized to sort of imitate the look of popular jazz orchestras from the 30s and 40s. Jazz, through the radio, captured the imaginations of African people in these cities where they had access to it. And the guitar, when it came along, was an instrument that mass-produced, was cheap enough for them to afford, and they developed what I can only call an extraordinary new sound using it. Let's listen to another song here. This is the kind of song that they were listening to before independence. What does it sound like? Who is this, you know? Have you heard it? This is the Johnny Pacheco song. Who's Johnny Pacheco? Very famous Cuban musician. Cuban sounds had actually gone, a lot of African music had gone to Cuba with the slaves and had later turned into the sound of Johnny Pacheco. And the African rhythms and songs from Cuba went back to Africa and helped inspire the rise of popular music there. Frequently, these were precisely the same rhythms, but now brought into, played with different instruments and orchestrated in this way that was perceived as modern, but it tapped into a much longer, deeper sense or strand of African music itself. This is Roncaille again. Is that too loud? Okay. But you can listen to the way this sound changes, initially being very much a sort of imitation of Cuban music, and gradually becoming its own new sound. Should I talk a little bit? Can I talk over this? Can you hear me? In many cases, the petty bourgeoisie of cities like Leopoldville were not Belgian, and they were not African. They were Greek or Lebanese. They were small traders who found a sort of niche. They didn't control the great big natural resource industries of the area. The European colonists did that. But they were able to open small markets and vend food and other goods, small tools, largely to an African clientele rather than to a European clientele. And these were the people who first brought in recording equipment and began recruiting local African musicians and giving them instruments and recording their music and sort of creating a local music scene for the first time. And they would open up these radio stations and start playing this music and use it to try to attract customers and to develop sort of loyal clienteles in different parts of these colonial cities. And you can see that there was a very conscious imitation of the look of successful European and American musicians and business people as well, this kind of dressed up look. And eventually you start to hear a sound that doesn't sound nearly so much like, well, it's evolving. I never know whether to tell you all to stand up and dance at this point in the lecture or not. In any case, in the independence period, a lot of these songs start to be about independence and about Africa and about African nationalism, and it's a celebratory moment. And it's actually extremely depressing looking back from the present at the failed states and failed promise of independence in Africa, and to look at these album covers and listen to this music and recognize how much optimism there was at that time and how little that optimism has been fulfilled since that time. A lot of these bands started traveling to Europe to make these recordings. And gradually, especially as the local studios and music industry sort of disintegrated between the 60s and the 80s, it became increasingly necessary for musicians to go to Europe if they wanted to make recordings, even if most of their albums were sold back in Africa. And there developed, this is sort of the beginning of world music in a lot of ways. There developed a kind of dual sound in which, as the popularity of African music grew in places like Brussels and Paris and Amsterdam and London, the musicians themselves increasingly relied on European opportunities to a greater and greater extent. And in part this was because the leaders of African states, such as Mobutu Sese Seko, in many ways forced them into oppressive relationships in their newly independent country. A lot of them were forced to perform for the president, perform for the party, to write songs celebrating the party. And even as their prospects of making a living through local sales declined, and this was accelerated greatly by the advent of the cassette tape, which allowed pirates essentially to copy these songs and make it virtually impossible to make a living. A lot of these musicians in turn ended up generating ridiculous quantities of recordings, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs, trying to keep ahead of the piracy of cassette tapes. And so you can find, Franco, for instance, has got 50 or 75 albums. Fela Kuti in Nigeria, similar kinds of ridiculous productivity. So let's talk about Franco. This is one of his earliest songs. On entre okay, on sort KO, which means you come in okay and you leave knocked out. And he's this is a celebration of the power of his own band, essentially, to overwhelm you. Franco became by far the most important and successful popular musician in Zaire over the following, beginning in the 50s and running all the way through the 80s. You can see. They're singing in French and in Lingala, which was the sort of lingua franca of Zaire. It was a language that sort of emerged and worked among all the different ethnic groups to the extent that people sort of put it together, but was not a sort of native indigenous tongue in Africa prior to this melding together. Oh, we already heard that. This is another song about independence. This is called Table Ronde, which just means round table. And this was recorded because the negotiations with the Belgian officials were called the round table discussions in Brussels. And they sing the names of all of the indigenous leaders who were sent to represent the Congolese at these negotiations. So this is a kind of praise song in the tradition of African traditional music. This is not Franco, by the way. That was Broncaye again. Now we'll listen to some Franco. The songs gradually got longer because the recording technologies improved, and you could record more than just like 2.5 or 3 minutes at a stretch. And eventually they got to be 10, 15 minutes long. In the bars when they were performed, they would play them for 30, 40, 50 minutes, an hour at a time, and play all night long with people dancing. The dancing is extremely important, which is why you shouldn't all be sitting down, but I guess there's nothing we can do about that. And they developed this pattern in which they would start with this sort of long, slower portion before bursting into what became the sort of signature of this music once it reached Europe. I'm not sure what Asda means, but this song was actually recorded as a commercial. It was a jingle. Franco and his band were hired to promote a product that was being sold in post-independence Kinshasa. I'd ask you to guess what it is, but no one ever succeeds in guessing. It's actually promoting Volkswagen. If you speak French and you listen, they go through and they sing the names of all the different models of Volkswagens. And you get very excited about your possibilities of buying a car. These incredibly potent symbols of progress and modernity. So here's the bridge. Vewe, VW. So anyway, Franco was compelled by Mobutu at various times to sing his praises and was brought under the thumb of Mobutu. He was enormously popular. He was way more popular than Mobutu himself. And forcing musicians to play this kind of supporting propagandistic role was widespread. In some countries, socialist countries of post-independence Africa, the government in fact monopolized music and recruited musicians and trained them and created national orchestras who were the official bands of these nation states and were given names like Bembaya Jazz Nationale, which is one of the most fabulous bands of all time, I must tell you. But they were like the official band of the nation state of Guinea, right? And they were trained through these cultural bureaucracies and encouraged to develop indigenous, sort of culturally sensitive forms of music. Mobutu imposed a kind of cultural revolution at one point and forced the musicians to stop wearing European garb and to dress in more native garb. And business people were forced to do this too. They were forced to get rid of their French names and start taking on authentic names. This was authenticité. Mobutu basically tried to build nationalism through these enforced cultural norms. Franco was in a better position to push back than most musicians because he was so popular, and eventually he just moved to Europe. And he had two bands. He had a Tepe OK jazz band in Africa, and he had another one in Europe. And they operated in parallel fashion, and they toured, and they both recorded and everything. They both had the same name, but they were in two places at the same time. And Franco himself relied increasingly on revenues from sales in Europe. And you can actually listen as the sound of music changes over the years as the European market becomes more and more important, and it sounds more and more like a discotheque in Europe, where in fact they were making most of their money. So we're almost out of time. I want to finish up very quickly. This is the sound as developed by the early 80s. So Franco was a very large man. And this was actually consistent with cultural norms in Africa. If you were successful, you were expected to be large. You were expected to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It was evidence of your wealth. It was evidence of your success. You not only had lots of wives and houses and cars, but you also had an enormous body. And in the 80s, he started to lose weight. And the people of Africa, by this point he was popular all over sub-Saharan Africa, but his fans were extremely concerned. He was losing weight. This was obviously not good. He was no longer a big man. The reason he was losing weight was that he had contracted AIDS. And before he died of AIDS, he recorded this song, Attention la sida, which is the world's finest 17-minute public health service announcement, in which he...
Oh, le sida,
une terrible maladie.
Le sida, un mal qui ne pardonne pas. Le sida, un mal qui n'épargne personne. Oh, c'est fléau le sida, qui laisse impuissante la médecine.
At this time, the governments of Africa were still in total denial about AIDS. It was a strictly taboo subject, and this kind of statement from a musician with the kind of stature that Franco had was an extremely bold, daring kind of statement to make. By this point now, perhaps it seems like ancient history, but the stigma attached to AIDS early on greatly facilitated its spread, and as you can see, it spread further in sub-Saharan Africa than anywhere else in the world. Here's a new infection from 1980 to 1999. Anyway, if you speak French and you can listen to the lyrics, it's the most powerful call to arms against AIDS that I've ever heard. And it's also just a song. All right, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.